when his loyal dog, Titan, becomes the key to unraveling a dangerous conspiracy, everything changes. What if everything you thought you knew about your past was a lie? Matthew Carter, locked away for a crime he didn't commit, is suddenly thrust into a web of lies and deceit when a photograph of his dog, Titan, reveals a connection to a long-forgotten fire and a man determined to erase all traces of his guilt. The deeper Matthew digs, the more dangerous the truth becomes, with every discovery leading him closer to the man who ruined his life, Everett. But time is running out. Can Matthew expose the truth before his enemies silence him forever? And what role does Titan play in this deadly game? Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet, now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, and be the first to hear our incredible new stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The silence in the courtroom was overwhelming, heavy like a blanket of lead pressing down on everyone present. Matthew Carter sat in the center of the room, his shoulders slumped, his eyes deeply set, and his hands trembling slightly in his lap. His appearance screamed exhaustion and resignation, yet in his gaze there was something more, a silent, desperate plea for redemption. This was the end of the line for him, but he wanted only one thing before it was all over. "Let me see Titan," he had begged the judge, and to his surprise, the request was granted. The wooden doors creaked open, and all eyes turned to the door as a robust German shepherd, Titan, was led into the room by an officer. The dog entered slowly, his ears alert and eyes scanning the room until they found Matthew. As soon as Titan locked eyes with him, he pulled hard on the leash, letting out a short howl that sliced through the silence, raw and powerful. Without warning, Matthew collapsed into tears. His previously controlled expression crumbled into sheer pain. "My God," someone whispered from the audience, their voice shaking as they too were moved by the emotional reunion. Titan, as soon as he was released, threw himself at Matthew. The man, kneeling, embraced the dog with an intensity that suggested his life depended on it. "I'm so sorry, my friend," he whispered, his voice trembling and barely audible. Tears flowed relentlessly as his hands ran through Titan's thick fur, as if trying to imprint that precious moment on his soul, knowing it would be the last time. Matthew's eyes, filled with agony, turned toward the judge as though silently pleading for something more, anything. A miracle, a change. Then something unexpected happened. Titan began tugging at Matthew's suit pocket with his teeth, persistent, determined. Matthew, confused, tried gently to push him away, but the dog kept going, pulling until a crumpled piece of paper fell to the ground. The defense attorney, sitting only a few feet away, grabbed the paper, and when he opened it, his face drained of color. He stood up abruptly and stared at the judge. "Your Honor, we need to suspend the proceedings immediately. This could change everything." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Whispers filled the air as the judge slammed his gavel, demanding order. Matthew, still in a haze, looked at the lawyer, then at the paper, his mind racing. What did that paper mean? He couldn't remember putting anything there, and how had Titan known it was there? For a moment, hope flickered in his heart, only to be quickly swallowed by fear. In his experience, hope always led to pain. The room was consumed by tense silence, broken only by the rustling of the lawyer's clothes as he hurried to the judge, holding the paper like a sacred artifact. Matthew's face was frozen in a mix of confusion and anxiety. He sat still, as though suspended on the edge of a cliff, the dog's warmth his only anchor. What's happening, he wondered, but no one seemed willing to offer him any answers. The judge, adjusting his glasses, took the paper from the lawyer, reading it silently. As his eyes moved over the lines, his rigid posture shifted. He furrowed his brow, and his expression wavered between doubt and surprise. Is this serious?" the judge asked, looking up at the lawyer, who nodded. The audience was restless, trying to make sense of the situation, while Matthew's heart hammered in his chest. His thoughts were a blur. "Mr. Carter," the judge finally said, turning his gaze to Matthew, who instinctively held Titan tighter. "Do you recognize this paper, these details?" Matthew shook his head, his confusion evident. "I have no idea what this is, Your Honor," he replied, his voice hoarse and choked. But deep inside, something was stirring, an unknown fear, mixed with a spark of hope. How had this paper ended up in his pocket? And why did Titan seem to know about it before anyone else? Before the judge could continue, the defense lawyer interrupted urgently. "Your Honor, we need an immediate recess to verify this information. If this document is authentic, it could prove my client was framed. It might be the evidence we've been missing to dismantle the entire case against him." The statement hit the courtroom like a bomb, causing murmurs and surprised glances. Matthew's eyes widened, disbelief and desperation washing over him. Framed, he thought, confused by the implications of the lawyer's words. What was going on? As the judge considered the lawyer's request, Matthew felt Titan's paws on his lap, the dog's presence almost calming him. He looked at the animal, and in Titan's eyes he saw not just loyalty, but a kind of certainty, almost human-like, as if Titan knew exactly what was going on. For the first time, Matthew allowed himself to entertain the thought that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a coincidence. "You've always known, haven't you, boy?" he murmured, stroking the dog with tenderness he could barely contain. The judge finally gave his ruling, banging the gavel with force. "The hearing will be adjourned until the information is verified. Mr. Carter, you will be transferred back to detention, but under special measures due to the potential impact of this evidence." Matthew's heart sank again. Hope had appeared, only to seem just out of reach. He looked at Titan, who was reluctantly being pulled away by an officer. "Hang in there, my friend," he whispered. "Maybe it's not over yet." Back in the cold, empty cell, Matthew felt the weight of silence fall on him like an invisible chain. Sitting on the small mattress, he stared at the floor, unable to process what had just happened. The image of Titan being taken from him burned in his mind. He had never seen the dog act with such determination, almost as if Titan understood something Matthew couldn't quite grasp. The more he thought about it, the more he couldn't shake the feeling. What if that piece of paper really could change everything? Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the defense lawyer worked frantically. The paper pulled from Matthew's pocket contained details that might just be the key to unlocking the truth. The weight of uncertainty was heavy, and the silence in the cell felt suffocating, as if every second held the potential to alter everything. Matthew Carter sat there, the past few days replaying over and over in his mind. He had been accused of a crime he knew he didn't commit. The trial had been a blur, filled with witnesses who all seemed determined to ruin him, aligning perfectly to seal his fate. But something changed during the court hearing when that piece of paper appeared. The paper that Titan, his loyal German shepherd, had pulled from his pocket during a critical moment. The lawyer, frantic with urgency, had returned with news that morning. The paper wasn't just a random note. It was a document that proved money had been transferred into Matthew's account just days before the crime, making it look as though he had a motive. Matthew's heart raced. The words of the lawyer felt like an electric shock. "Someone set it all up," he murmured, his voice low, a mix of disbelief and emotion. He had always known he was innocent, but now, with this revelation, everything seemed to be falling into place. "Do you think this will be enough?" Matthew asked, his voice trembling. The lawyer hesitated, the weight of the situation clear on his face. "We're closer to the truth than ever," he replied, "but we still don't have all the pieces." There was one thing, however, that the lawyer couldn't explain Titan. Somehow, the dog seemed to know something no one else did. The thought lingered in Matthew's mind. What did Titan know? Could the dog have found something hidden? The idea seemed absurd, but in that moment, Matthew was willing to believe anything. As the lawyer left to continue investigating, Matthew spent the rest of the night lying in the cold, uncomfortable cell. The uncertainty gnawed at him, Titan's presence was his only solace in the madness, the one anchor in the storm. Matthew replayed every moment from the day he was arrested, trying to find any clue that might explain how that paper ended up in his pocket. All he could see was Titan, his deep, loyal eyes, and the strange, almost human certainty the dog seemed to exude. It was as if Titan knew something that Matthew couldn't comprehend. Meanwhile, the lawyer's investigation was turning up strange details. The document not only contained proof of the money transfer, but it also pointed to a powerful businessman with political ties, someone who had no obvious connection to Matthew. The discovery was unsettling. Why would this man be involved? What did he stand to gain by framing Matthew? The lawyer knew he was treading dangerous ground, but the closer he got to the truth, the more apparent it became. This was a conspiracy far bigger than anyone could have imagined. One afternoon, a guard came with a message from Matthew. There was an unexpected visitor waiting for him. Matthew was wary. Unexpected visits were rarely a sign of good news. When he arrived at the visiting room, he was met by a woman sitting on the other side of the glass. She was well-dressed, her demeanor cold and calculating, but there was a tension in her eyes that betrayed her calm exterior. "You don't know me," she said, her voice clipped, "but I know who you are. And more importantly, I know who put you here." Matthew stayed silent, studying her carefully. She continued, her words deliberate and heavy with meaning. "The man whose name is on that document has more secrets than you can imagine, and you were just a pawn in his game. What he did to you was personal." "Personal?" Matthew echoed, disbelief in his voice. "I don't even know him. Why would he do this to me?" The woman looked away, as if choosing her words carefully. "Because he needed someone to blame. And you were the perfect target. You're not as unknown as you think." Her words cut deeper than any accusation, leaving Matthew stunned and confused. Before she left, she handed him a note for the lawyer and said, "He'll know what to do with this." And just like that, she was gone. Matthew's mind was spinning. Who was this woman? How did she know so much? And what did it mean that he wasn't as unknown as he thought? The questions surged within him, unanswered and swirling, as doubts began to creep into his thoughts. Who was behind this? What was their plan? And why had Titan been so insistent on protecting him? Back in his cell, Matthew held his head in his hands, the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. He felt as though he were on the edge of a revelation, but the pieces of the puzzle refused to fall into place. Yet one thing was certain. The key to everything lay with Titan. The German shepherd was more than just a pet. He was Matthew's last connection to the truth that had been hidden from him. The following day, the lawyer returned with an envelope containing an address and a phrase. "Ask about the fire." When Matthew saw the address, a chill ran through him. It was the shelter where he had adopted Titan. The memories came flooding back. The shelter, the dog, the scars, and the undeniable bond they shared. Something in the shelter's past, and in Titan's past, was tied directly to Matthew's situation. His instincts told him that this was the key to everything. He had to get answers. As the tension in the prison continued to rise, Matthew began to notice strange behavior from the other inmates. Whispers filled the yard, and furtive glances were exchanged. The unease in the air was palpable, and it was clear that something bigger was at play, something that Matthew was only beginning to understand. The next move would be critical. Matthew couldn't shake the feeling that something far larger than his own case was at play. In the dim, cold light of his cell, the walls seemed to close in on him as he lay awake, restless. The unsettling sensation of being observed intensified with each passing hour. The quiet murmurs of guards in the hallways and the nervous glances from fellow inmates seemed to signal an invisible force surrounding him. Every movement, every footstep echoed in his mind, keeping him alert and on edge. The night was especially quiet, a kind of silence that filled the prison with an eerie weight. Then, suddenly, footsteps rang down the corridor, stopping just in front of his cell. Matthew's senses sharpened. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew something was about to happen. The footsteps faded as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving behind a thick tension in the air. It was then that he understood the severity of his situation. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was part of something much darker. When the lawyer returned the next morning, his face was etched with concern, and the grim news he brought did little to ease Matthew's growing anxiety. The shelter, where Titan had been rescued, had burned down years ago in a mysterious fire, leaving behind nothing but ashes. Worse still, records from the scene showed that Titan had been found on a property owned by John Everett, the same man responsible for framing Matthew. The revelation felt like a punch to the gut. Every piece of the puzzle was starting to fall into place, but the picture that emerged was horrifying. Titan, the dog who had been Matthew's only source of comfort during his darkest days, was now the key to unraveling a dangerous conspiracy. The scars on Titan's body weren't just physical reminders of a traumatic past. They were clues that could expose a far-reaching web of corruption. Matthew realized that he wasn't just fighting for his own freedom. He was fighting to protect Titan, whose past held secrets that, if revealed, could bring down powerful people. Matthew's stomach churned with a newfound sense of urgency. He had to find Titan before it was too late. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. Time was slipping through his fingers. The lawyer's grim demeanor matched Matthew's growing unease. The fire had been no accident. It had been a desperate attempt to cover up evidence, including the animals who could testify to the horrors of the underground dog fighting ring run by John Everett. Titan had survived the fire, and now he was the living witness to a series of atrocities that could change everything. As Matthew absorbed this information, it became clearer than ever he had been set up. The fire that destroyed the shelter had been orchestrated to silence any potential witnesses, and somehow, Titan had escaped. But now, it seemed that Everett was closing in, determined to erase the last trace of his dark deeds. Titan's survival was a threat, and Matthew had unwittingly become the protector of the only living being who could expose everything. Back in his cold, lonely cell, Matthew lay awake, unable to escape the weight of the conspiracy closing in around him. The sense of being watched had intensified, and he could feel the tension in the air like an electric current. He knew his every move was being monitored. But even in the midst of it all, one thought consumed him. Titan needed to be protected. If anything were to happen to him, Matthew's last hope would be gone. The next day, he insisted that his lawyer contact an animal protection group. He couldn't risk Titan's safety, not now, when everything was coming to a head. The lawyer hesitated, but ultimately agreed, seeing the desperation in Matthew's eyes. There was no time to waste. As night fell, Matthew's sense of unease only grew. The footsteps that echoed through the hall seemed deliberate now, each step calculated, as if they knew exactly where he was. He couldn't afford to ignore the growing danger. Whatever was happening, whatever was about to unfold, he knew he couldn't face it alone. Then, unexpectedly, a guard appeared at his door. Matthew recognized him immediately. He was one of the more reliable guards, but tonight there was something different in his demeanor. The guard looked around cautiously before speaking, his voice low and tense. "There are things happening here that you don't fully understand," the guard said. "Powerful people are involved, and you're getting too close to the truth. You need to be careful." Matthew's heart raced. He felt a chill run down his spine. "If you know something, why tell me now?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though his mind was spinning with questions. The guard hesitated. "Because I believe you're innocent, and because they're moving fast. I don't know how long I can protect you." Before Matthew could respond, the guard slid an envelope under the door and quickly left, disappearing into the shadows. Matthew, heart pounding, rushed to open the envelope. Inside, there was an old photograph of Titan, much younger, chained in a place that looked like a rural property. In the background, there was a barn with a familiar symbol painted on its wood. Matthew's mind raced, trying to place the symbol, but it was like a blur. The photo was another piece of the puzzle, one that was becoming more complicated and more dangerous with every passing moment. It was clear now that the conspiracy surrounding Matthew was far deeper and more intricate than he had ever imagined. He had always known that something wasn't right, but the truth was beginning to reveal itself in pieces. Each discovery felt like a step closer to something much larger than he had anticipated. Days passed, and Matthew's sense of being watched grew even stronger. Glances from other prisoners, and even from guards, became increasingly suspicious. He didn't know who could be trusted, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to find Titan and fast. The stakes had never been higher, and Matthew was running out of time. The photo in the envelope ignited a new fire within Matthew. He had always known that there was more to the situation than met the eye, but now he felt the weight of urgency pressing down on him. He had to find that barn, the one in the photograph, and uncover the dark secrets that tied Titan to the man responsible for his imprisonment. The photo wasn't just a clue, it was a lifeline. He could feel the stakes rising with every passing moment. When the lawyer returned, Matthew wasted no time. He handed over the photo and the note. "Does this mean anything to you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, even though his anxiety threatened to take over. The lawyer took the photo and studied it carefully, his brow furrowing as he examined the symbol. After a long pause, he shook his head. "Not immediately," the lawyer said. "But this symbol, it could be important. I'll look into it. I'll start there." As the lawyer left, Matthew felt a flicker of hope mixed with unease. For the first time in weeks, he believed that the truth was finally within his grasp, but the clock was ticking and the danger was real. He could feel it creeping closer. The following morning, the air in the prison felt heavier than usual, as if something was about to happen. Matthew felt the tension in every step he took, especially as he walked to the cafeteria, his every move watched by the guards. But it wasn't just the guards he noticed. There was a palpable change among the other inmates. It wasn't paranoia. It was as if everyone was waiting for something, and he was right in the middle of it. He tried to remain calm, but his instincts screamed that danger was closing in. In the visitation room, the lawyer arrived with a grim expression. He wasted no time, placing a stack of papers on the table, adjusting his glasses, and looking directly at Matthew. "I found the barn in the picture," he said, his voice steady but laden with concern. "It's on a property that's been abandoned for years, but it belongs to a man we know very well, John Everett." Matthew's blood ran cold. Everett, of course. What else had Matthew expected? The lawyer continued, unperturbed. The barn was used as a meeting point for illegal activities, and it seems Titan was rescued from there during an operation that almost uncovered the entire truth about Everett's operation. Matthew closed his eyes, the weight of the revelation pressing on him. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information. "So, now what? How does this help my case?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but inside, his heart was pounding. The lawyer didn't look at him, but spoke with quiet intensity. "We need to link Titan directly to the case. If we can prove he was there and that Everett is tied to him, this could be the turning point. But Matthew, this also means we're dealing with something very dangerous. There are people who don't want this truth to come out." Matthew's mind was spinning. He could see it all now. The truth, the dangers, and the steps that lay ahead. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting to expose a web of lies that reached far beyond his own predicament. But with every new discovery, he also felt the shadows growing closer. Every piece of information felt like a thread pulling him deeper into a labyrinth of danger. Back in his cell, Matthew felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. He was torn between a glimmer of hope and the overwhelming fear that he was walking a dangerous line. He thought back to his time with Titan, to the bond they had formed, and to the unspoken understanding between them. Titan was more than just a dog. There was something about his behavior, something beyond instinct, that told Matthew that Titan understood far more than he let on. As the night settled in, Matthew's unease only deepened. The footsteps in the hallway returned. He had grown accustomed to the sounds by now, but tonight, something was different. No one stopped in front of his cell. Peering through the small window in the door, Matthew saw a guard exchanging suspicious glances with a prisoner. It wasn't just an ordinary conversation. It was calculated, deliberate. Something was being planned, and Matthew knew that he had to stay alert. He sat on his bed, his thoughts racing. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the danger. He couldn't let his guard down. Titan was the key. Matthew knew that with every new discovery, the truth was slipping through his fingers like sand. But he was determined. He had to protect Titan, and he had to expose the dark secrets that had been buried for so long. The pieces of the puzzle were all falling into place, but the picture created was more terrifying than anything he could have imagined. No matter the cost, he would uncover the truth. Time was running out, and he couldn't afford to let fear stand in his way. Fate seemed to be playing its final hand, and Matthew was ready to play his own. The early morning brought an eerie silence, only broken by the distant sound of metal doors clanging shut. Lying in his bed, Matthew could feel it. Something was shifting behind the scenes. He had become adept at recognizing the subtle signs. The guards' diverted glances, the hushed murmurs among the prisoners, the way his lawyers seemed increasingly pressured. It was as if everything was converging toward a singular, inevitable moment. Time was running out, and Matthew knew that he needed to act before it was too late. That morning, the lawyer returned with new information that only deepened the mystery. "Matthew," the lawyer began, his tone serious, "we found records of other properties owned by Everett. One of them is directly linked to the fire at the shelter where Titan was found. The strangest part is that these properties were transferred to third parties shortly before Everett's arrest. This is no coincidence." Matthew's anger surged within him. Not only had Everett set him up, but now he was trying to erase any trace that could connect him to those places. "So, not only did he set me up," Matthew said through clenched teeth, "but he's also trying to erase everything that ties him to these places." The lawyer nodded. "Exactly. But now we have a problem. We need solid proof. And from what I've discovered, there's someone who might have the answers. Someone who worked for Everett back then." Matthew leaned in, listening intently. The lawyer revealed that the person in question was a former trusted employee of Everett, who had mysteriously disappeared after the fire. Now, the man lived in a small, remote town, avoiding contact with anyone who could link him to his past. "If we can talk to him, we might get the confirmation we need about Everett's involvement," the lawyer explained. "But it will be risky. He may not be willing to cooperate." Matthew nodded grimly. They had no choice. If this man knew anything, they needed to find him, even if it meant taking a risk. Meanwhile, in the prison, the tension was building. Suspicious footsteps and furtive glances had become more frequent, and Matthew knew the walls were closing in. There was a distinct shift in the atmosphere, a sense that someone was making a final attempt to silence him. But instead of fear, Matthew felt a surge of determination. "They might try to stop me," he thought. Asterisk, "but I won't give up. Not now, asterisk." As the day wore on, Matthew steeled himself for what was coming. He knew the next few hours would be pivotal. The truth was within his grasp, but it was surrounded by danger. Thoughts of Titan filled his mind. How the dog always seemed to know more than he let on. How his loyalty had never wavered. "You're the key to everything, boy," Matthew whispered to himself. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect you and reveal the truth." The courtroom was packed that morning, with an almost palpable tension hanging in the air. Matthew sat beside his lawyer, his heart pounding in his chest as he awaited the start of the hearing. The new evidence had been carefully prepared. The photo of Titan in the barn, the testimony from Everett's former employee, and documents linking the businessman to the fire and a network of illegal activities. In the corner of the room, Matthew saw Titan, brought in by an animal protection organization. The German shepherd looked at him with the same unwavering loyalty as always, and in that moment, Matthew felt a renewed sense of strength. The lawyer began his argument, presenting the testimony that would change everything. The former employee spoke of how Everett had orchestrated the fire to cover up evidence, and how Matthew had been falsely accused. He explained that Titan had been one of the few survivors, and that his escape had placed the dog and anyone protecting him at the center of a dangerous conspiracy. Matthew Carter wasn't just a victim of a setup, the lawyer continued, but he also unknowingly risked his life to protect the only living witness to this scheme. The revelation rocked the courtroom. As the judge reviewed the evidence, his expression shifted from disbelief to indignation. Finally, he spoke. "The charges against Matthew Carter are unfounded," he declared. "There will be a full investigation into Everett's activities." As the judge's words sank in, Matthew felt a rush of relief and emotion wash over him. Emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He looked at Titan, who was wagging his tail as if he understood. In that moment, Matthew knew the battle had been won. For the first time in years, he felt that both his life and Titan's were being restored. After the hearing, as Matthew left the courthouse with Titan by his side, he stepped into the sunlight, feeling its warmth on his face as if he were a free man once more. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but in that moment, nothing could break the bond he shared with Titan. "We made it, boy," he said, kneeling down to pet the dog. The truth had finally prevailed, and with it came the promise of a new beginning for both of them.